Hello and welcome to the CDO Magazine interview series. I'm Cheryl Rodenfels with Stratascale, and we're partnering with CDO Magazine, MIT, CDO IQ, and the International Society of Chief Data Officers in a series of interviews. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with Don Vu, Chief Data Officer at Northwestern Mutual. Welcome, Don.
Hey, Cheryl. Good to be here.
Okay, so do you have any tips for other CDOs or chief data analytics officers who are trying to drive their AI initiatives in their organizations?
No, thanks for asking that. And Cheryl, it's something that's been on my mind for quite a while. So for me, I oftentimes try to synthesize things, at least for myself, in ways that are, the most pertinent kind of factors of things. And when I think about maximizing the impact of an AI strategy, I have kind of coalesced, at least personally, around kind of like 5 keys. And the first one is starting with a cross-functional coalition. And we kind of touched on this with some of our earlier conversation, but I've oftentimes seen the mistake of other data teams, like working a little bit on the side and then trying to bring a solution to the business as if it's this magical thing that appeared. And I've found that having a cross-functional coalition that's actually there from the beginning and working alongside you to bring a solution to life is actually far more effective. And we've seen that whether it's in underwriting or the various initiatives that we have in partnership with our financial advisors. So that's kind of the first key. A second key is really taking a perspective of treating your AI initiatives as a portfolio. And so there may be a myriad of initiatives that you're working on in parallel. Think about how they complement each other. Some might be more risky than others. Some might have a far larger scale. And certainly you generally want to gravitate towards large scale, large impact sort of initiatives. But really think as a portfolio because they're not always going to hit, right? You oftentimes plant a lot of green shoots. Some will grow more fruitfully than others. So I found that having a portfolio approach really mitigates the downside risk of just going all in on perhaps one initiative. The third key that comes to mind is the notion of AI governance. So, regulation, AI bias, ethics, privacy, even security. These are all considerations that are sometimes seen as defensive in nature. They're sometimes tackled towards the end, right before you're deploying a solution. But I found that having AI governance considerations up front is actually far more useful. It kind of goes hand in hand with this notion of cross-functional collaboration. But really, being intentional and proactive about tackling AI governance from the beginning is critically important. And then operational change management. I think we kind of touched on this in prior discussions before, but at least for us, we're not doing AI as an academic exercise with no disparagement on our friends in academia, but it's very much to move the needle for our business partners. And so thinking again on the front end about how we actually make these models and the actions which we hope to influence, making all that operational, that really needs to be, discussed and thought of in the front, or you're really, perhaps going to get stuck coming out of the gate. And then the last thing is really around focusing on short-term wins. This is probably complementary to the portfolio notion, but think about what incremental value you'll be providing in the short term as you have perhaps a more longitudinal, strategic, and longer-term perspective, really gaining credibility for your cross-functional coalition, for your business partners, for your executive sponsors. I think that's really, really key. And, folks talk about that all the time, but I think it's really important to stress that with AI strategies as well.
Wow. I'll tell you, hit home for me on a lot of these because I think change management is super important because it's not only how you do things, it's how do you adopt it and how do your customers know what you have. And I think it ties all of those things together, especially with the portfolio. And it sounds like you've developed things and sometimes they may not be available or exactly used right now, but if somebody comes in with a request and it fits 80% of those requirements, it's probably just a tweak to figure out how to get them their results, and their inquiry can be handled a lot quicker instead of starting everything from scratch. I think that leads me to wondering, what services do you provide your internal customers? How do they know about you? Is it, are they focused on reporting? Are they focused on research or projects? Do you have a service catalog that you publish? Are you a center of excellence? What sort of ways do you get yourself out so that people know you exist and they know how to use your organization?
Yeah, there's a few different ways by which we try to, evangelize our overall data strategy and the services that we provide. And so first and foremost, when I arrived to Northwestern Mutual, we centralized a lot of our data capabilities under one umbrella, such that we could have that more strategic direction and more cohesive strategic direction across all the functional areas, like I mentioned before. So as part of that, we have this notion of a center of excellence, like you described. We also have this notion of a community of analysts that for analytical professionals that are within and federated various business units that aren't all centralized, we provide a community by which best practices are shared across the entire enterprise, with certainly our center of excellence like leading the charge on much of that. We also have what we call our data strategy steering committee. So from the very beginning, when we shared our overall strategic roadmap with the board and with our senior executives, we also formed a data strategy steering committee that meets on a monthly basis, goes over the roadmap progress, speaks to what's coming from an intake perspective, shares best practices. It's an incredibly transparent way by which we govern the progression of our overall data strategy. So yeah, I think those are, excuse me, the most prominent examples by which we really share with the broader enterprise what we're working on.
I think that's fantastic. Again, you've got a lot of good work going on. It changes the way these departments do business. It changes how your customers interact with you. I can see why you're successful with this. And I also can see why your customers probably keep you busy with tons of requests. It's okay, so you've done that for me. How much more can you do for me? And what else can we look at? Which brings me to a question of what technologies and services are on the horizon for you and your team. You've been using AI and ML enabled tools. What's next in the data space for you, and why is that?
That's a great question. I think, Cheryl, I'll maybe tackle it from a couple different angles. One of the things that allows us to be responsive and deliver value quickly for our business partners is that we had a very strategic and a very clear point of view on the capabilities that we needed as an organization to deliver for our business partners, whether it was aggregating data in a single source of truth, whether it was a way to raise the bar on the way we deploy and operationalize predictive models through an MLOps pipeline, whether it was, a variety of other capabilities. So as business partners have come to us, we've really considered to be more of like a convergence sort of exercise where we're converging their requests with stuff that we already had on track. And I think that's really helped us quite a bit. So some of the things that, are on the horizon for us that we've been thinking about, I mentioned before that we started with a foundational notion of aggregating our data in one place into a unified data platform. But we're now, as you kind of alluded to, started to think about some more advanced machine learning capabilities. So leaning into things like AutoML, leaning into things like a more robust AI/ML pipeline, such that we can reduce the time to value for analytical solutions. Those are some kind of key areas that we've really leaned into recently.
Now, does your team handle both the operational and the innovation, where they're going out and looking ahead, as well as engineering and architecting the solutions?
Yeah, we do. We do that in a couple different ways. So I'm very grateful to, within my own organization, within the CDO org, we have what we call our core data engineering team. We have our data science and analytics team, within which we have machine learning, analytics, but then also an innovation arm specific to data science. We have data governance as well. And then we have a data product team. So, all of those functions working harmoniously together are how we deliver. But the innovation team within data science and analytics, I think, is very key. Because to your point, I think, and I've always felt that we as leaders need to be very bimodal. We need to not only operate and take care of today, but we also need to innovate and understand where the puck is going. So our team and the innovation team within the DSA team helps us do that. We also have a very unique relationship and organization called the Northwestern Mutual Data Science Institute. It's a $40 million partnership between NM, the University of Marquette, the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. We partner very closely with those teams to work on initiatives and more longitudinal research-based initiatives that leverage university faculty and don't necessarily have as much overhead on our operational staff, whether data science, data engineering, et cetera. But we do intentionally plan for convergence between those projects and our own data science roadmap or data strategy roadmap. So that's another innovation lever that we leverage, partnering with academia.
Well, that's pretty expansive, and it's really inclusive as well. Don, thank you for joining me today. And everyone, please visit cdomagazine.tech for additional interviews.
Thanks so much, Cheryl. Thanks for having me.